Hello, everyone. Welcome to Friday's edition of Weekend Waypoints, a production of SEC Extra and D1Baseball.com. I'm your host, Joe Healy, going to get you ready for the penultimate, next to last weekend of SEC baseball here for the regular season, believe it or not. On the last traditional weekend, right? Because the last weekend we have the Thursday through Saturdays to get ready, for the quick turnaround to Hoover. So last kind of typical weekend this weekend. So a lot of stuff to get into. Looking forward to chatting with you today. But first, I have to remind you that this episode of Weekend Waypoints and every episode of Weekend Waypoints this season is brought to you by Academy Sports and Outdoors, which is your new home for Jordan Brand. Gear up today and take flight. Make your play in the latest head-to-toe Jordan gear for the entire family, available in-store and at academy.com. Unleash your greatness with Jordan Brand, now at Academy. All right, let's get into it. I guess first things first, Thursday night, Auburn 24, South Carolina 2. That was obviously a 7-inning game. And there's really not a lot to say here. I mean, we can give kudos to some Auburn players. Eric Guevara, 4 for 5 with a grand slam. Also had a triple. Chris Rimbert drove in 6 runs. Cam Tilley was pretty solid in his start, 5 strong innings. But, not a lot to really say from a analysis standpoint, because this just kind of feels like a continuation of some trends. On the positive side, obviously, Auburn playing well. This is an opportunity for them at home against an overmatched South Carolina team. This is an opportunity for Auburn to really make some hay and go into the final weekend in a situation where it feels like it's more or less got a host spot locked up. That's certainly in play. Its RPI went up to number 3. I don't know if it was after yesterday's win or if it happened before that based on other movement in the RPI, but either way, they sit at number 3 this morning. A top 8 certainly in play for Auburn as well. Just a little bit tougher road there, just because they're sitting at 14 wins now. You probably got to get to something like 18 to feel good about that. Doesn't mean you have to get 18 to secure that, but to feel confident about it, you probably need to get into something like that range. But they could more or less lock up a host spot with a really good weekend here this weekend, if you assume the RPI stays where it is, and I think it will. So there's that. On the South Carolina side, just is what it is. It just feels like a lost season continues, right? If it weren't for the season Missouri is having, I think there'd be a lot more. There's already a decent amount of scrutiny on South Carolina and attention being paid to it, but it would probably be even more intense if it weren't for having Missouri sitting there winless in the league. South Carolina now 5-20 in the conference. Not great. Been asked a lot, obviously, about the pulmonary situation. There were some, rumors buzzing online about him announcing his retirement, early in the week. That turned out to be nothing. He put out he said that I intend to be back. Said all the things you'd expect him to say. We'll see. I don't know that anybody has a great feel for the direction South Carolina is going to go, because ultimately I thought they'd struggle this year. Obviously, I did not think they would struggle like this. South Carolina probably didn't anticipate struggling like this. So it's tough to come up with a plan B when your plan A has gone south so quickly. But on the preview podcast last night that Mike Rooney and I did, previewing the weekend, we talked about it a little bit, and just no matter who the coach is, South Carolina may move on from Pulmonary. We'll see. Pulmonary may also retire. But even if whether he stays or whether he goes, or whoever's in the dugout, to me, that's less important. And it's more about, are you serious about, you say you want to be in the same breath as LSU and Tennessee and Texas and Texas A&M in terms of the way it commits to baseball. You say you want to be in that conversation, and you've been there before, obviously, having won national titles. So you say that, but are you really willing to do that, to do what it takes? Because right now I can tell you they're not. They're not on the same footing. They're just not. And so further investment is needed if they're really going to be serious about that. Being a year-to-year contender, as is, they could probably compete here and there. Certainly under Kingston, they competed at the top of the conference here and there. But if you want to be an every year type of deal, like what we see with teams like Tennessee and LSU and Arkansas, of course, you're going to need to do more. So it's just going to be a big offseason regardless of the direction that the coaching situation goes. All right, let's move on to some preview stuff. Let me look at some comments as well. We got a few in there. Let's see. Nicholas Doherty was first in. Good morning, Nicholas. He says, does Vandy have enough to win a regional and even a super? Yeah, because I think so often with Vanderbilt, it felt like they have enough to win a super, but the regional was a tougher thing for them to pull off, because the last couple of Vanderbilt teams in particular, where the offense was a little light, but the pitching was still pretty solid, you felt like, hey, if we're in a 3-game series, if you go back last year to like, okay, if we're in a 3-game series, we've got, Carter Holton, or we've got whoever that we feel pretty good about. We can, once you win game 1, you're in good, you just got to win one of the next 2. That's pretty easy to wrap your head around a team like Vanderbilt winning. But the issue has been in the past, like, regionals get messy. And unless you're obviously the most, just far and away more talented than the teams you're playing in a regional, and you blow through it 3-0, like, you're going to have to scratch and claw sometimes. And if you lose a game, you're really going to have to fight your way out. And Vanderbilt just really hasn't been equipped to do that. But this year, I think they are, because the offense still has questions. And I do think that lineup can go quiet against good pitching sometimes. And so that is a concern for me as we head toward the postseason. But I do think there's been some positive signs for that lineup. And then secondarily, I really like Vanderbilt's bullpen. And so I think there's a situation where even if you don't get the starting pitching that the high-end starting pitching, the starting pitching at its best, I think their bullpen is deep enough to where they can mitigate that to some degree. And that's going to be, that would be super important in a regional setting. So I do, Nicholas, think that there's a real chance that the Vanderbilt could be an Omaha team. I'm not sure I'm super, I don't know that I'd pick them for that. Some of it depends on the draw, which we won't know for a couple of weeks, but I think they've got enough for sure. This is as good as I felt about a Vanderbilt team in a while. Carl Dunn says, good morning from rainy Baton Rouge. Again, here we go. I'm so sick of this rain. I hear you, Carl. I got to see if this game will get off at all tonight. Poor Coach Maneri. I'm really feeling bad. Yeah, first on the rain part, it does seem like LSU in particular. And look, that's life on the Gulf, right? Like I grew up on the Gulf, so like I get it. This time of year is rainy, can be very rainy. Actually, the worst flooding I ever experienced in Houston in all my years living there was not any of the hurricanes, at least for my neighborhood. There's some other places that were, had it worse at various times. But in my neighborhood, the worst flooding we ever had was just a random, like, May thunderstorm that just like rolled in out of nowhere, seemingly out of nowhere, and just dumped a bunch of rain on us. And like everybody got caught out because we didn't, with a hurricane, you've got some warning and you realize, hey, if you're going to be out and about in this, you're taking, you're kind of just taking responsibility for yourself. But this was just a Tuesday afternoon, and here comes the rain, and everybody got caught out because they were at work and whatever else. So anyway, so I get the rain. I've been there, Carl. But yeah, it seems like LSU in particular has had a lot of rain stuff that has caused there to be start times of like, 8 and 9 o'clock local and what have you. So hopefully such a big series with Arkansas this weekend. So hopefully things go off without a hitch there. Carl also says, if I can get it to, sorry, it's not my system is not cooperating with me. There we go. Maneri was given a bad bill of goods by Ray Tanner, and Tanner left him holding the bag. That might be fair. Obviously we're not in the rooms that those conversations are being had, but I do think that is something people are talking about now, of just the, part of the reason why Paul was there is because he wanted to work for Ray Tanner, and obviously has a lot of respect and trust with Ray Tanner. And Ray Tanner probably didn't want to be moved off the job. So maybe he just, didn't think ahead that way. I don't know. We don't know, but it has complicated the situation that a big part of that taking the job for Paul was to work with Ray. And like 5 minutes after he takes the job, Ray is gone. So that definitely is a complicating factor there. I got my shout out to Buc-ee's. Got the Buc-ee's Cup going this morning. All right. Let's Todd Harris. Happy Friday, and happy Friday to you, Todd. Some beautiful weather this weekend in Lexington. Good to hear that. Looks pretty good out my window here in the Carolinas too. Says my Cats need a tough series win versus Oklahoma. Any shot we can take down Kyson Witherspoon tonight. He's tough. Indeed. He's definitely in the conversation. If you said, hey, Joe, you got to win one game tonight, who are you going with? Maybe my first pick is Liam Doyle, but if he's first, Kyson's second, and probably vice versa, right? Kate Anderson may be in the mix, but but yeah, he is really good. He's fun to watch. So it'll be stressful, Todd, because I know you're you're rooting for Kentucky, but if you separate yourself from that, he is fun to watch. Like the stuff is really good. He's so athletic on the mound. Loves to use his cutter. He uses his cutter the way most pitchers use their four-seam fastball, where it's the pitch that gets him back in the strike zone, that kind of refocuses when he needs a strike. If he's behind the count, it seems like he goes cutter quite often. So it's an interesting repertoire, bunch of pitches. There's a chance he's human, right? And it's just going to be a matter of, you understand, if you're Kentucky, you're not scoring 7 runs tonight, probably, unless something unforeseen happens, right? And maybe you get to the bullpen afterwards, but you're not scoring 7 off Witherspoon. So you just know everything is going to be amplified. You have to play clean defense. You have to get 2-out hitting. If you're able to get guys in scoring position, you have to cash them in, because you're just not going to get that many opportunities. You have to be prepared to win 3-2, and that's just kind of the reality of it. Big series this weekend for Kentucky, no doubt about that. All right, let's see. Got a few more in here. Kobe Walker says, do you think Mississippi State wins a series against Ole Miss? I do. I think I picked that for this weekend. Obviously, the atmosphere is going to be helpful. It's in Starkville. I'm sure that'll be a crazy good atmosphere. Both teams need it, though. Ole Miss is in a situation where they could still host. If they win this series, like, they'd still have work to do as they move forward, but it's still on the table for them. So they've got plenty to play for. And Mississippi State obviously has plenty to play for. Pardon me. Trying to get in the tournament, and we're kind of assuming they're going to get there. In large part, frankly, because they have Mizzou next weekend. But if you're Mississippi State, obviously you want to get some of the heavy lifting done this weekend, so you don't go into the final weekend. I don't care how down Mizzou is, how much Mizzou has struggled. You never really want to go. If you have an opportunity to get it done before that, you'll want to go ahead and do that, because you just never want to leave it to the last minute, and because that's how, if things don't go according to plan, that's how guys press and it gets overwhelming, all that kind of stuff. So you'd like to take some pressure off. You'd like to take some pressure off ahead of that Missouri weekend. Patrick Yankee says, huge series at KPP today. That's Kentucky Proud Park. Do you think Kentucky can get to 13 wins? Go Batcats. They can. Kind of feels like they have to win this series. Last home series of the season. You've got an Oklahoma team that is very good, but not unbeatable. So Kentucky will be in this series. A couple keys for me. One is like I said, Kentucky really can't give Oklahoma a lot of extra opportunities, just because Kentucky's not a lineup that's going to be able to continually punch back. They've done that some this year, but not a ton. And it's one of the reasons why they have the 1-run losses they do. Is sometimes it's tough for them to answer when they need to answer. So there's that. I also think I'm curious to see what Kentucky looks like physically, because my colleague Mike Rooney did the Sunday game against Mississippi State, and one of his takeaways is that Kentucky just looked a little gassed as a team, and it makes sense because they've had very few stress-free games on either end. They've gotten blown out pretty rarely, and they haven't won very many blowouts. So every game has been stressful to the max, it feels like. And so and they've had some injury issues, right? So they've had to probably run some guys more than they would have liked. And they look, according to Runes, and I believe him, look a little worse for wear. But, if you're Kentucky and you want to get to the postseason, this weekend is huge. You got Vanderbilt, the final weekend of the season on the road next weekend for Kentucky. And you really don't want to have to go to Nashville against Vanderbilt team that might be playing for a top 8. You can't go there and feel like you have to get a series win, because that is always going to be a tough nut to crack. So, but they can, Patrick, to answer your question, they can get to 13, I think. But this weekend is huge for that. Canes Cats Heats says, who's better than Miami? Nobody. Right now Miami is about as good as anybody. They're playing so well. Impressive stuff there. That turnaround has been such a good story. Let's see. I'm scrolling to make sure we haven't. All right. Aaron Simmerly says 12, 13, or 14 wins for my Gators. I assume you're meaning for an at-large. Saw a graphic where there have been some SEC teams with a top 30 RPI and strength of schedule and still be left out, although Florida's top 20 in both. Yeah, so it can happen to get left out with 12, 13, or 14 wins, but it's increasingly rare. Where you had 4 teams with 13 regular season wins and they all got in. Now, some of those teams did work in Hoover, right? LSU got to the SEC tournament finals, and other teams at least won a game there. So there was a little bit of garnish on the resume, if you will. But the 13 is probably the number you need to shoot for. 12 has been done very rarely. Alabama 2019, I believe, was the year, maybe 2018. I think it was 2019, though. They were 12 and 17, pardon me, because they had a game canceled. So they didn't have 18 losses. They had 17. That ended up kind of helping them. Their RPI was like 25 or 26. So I say all that to say 12 is possible. 13, I would say you're on the right side of it, at least as you go into the SEC tournament. And then 14 is like not even probably a conversation anymore. And that's how narrow the SEC is. The difference of a few wins is all it takes to be like, hey, we feel like we're pretty much a lock, or on the other end of the spectrum, we're just totally out of the discussion and we have work to do going to Hoover. It's a pretty narrow gap there, and Florida certainly toying with it. But that's a big series this weekend against Texas too, where it's like, if they get the best version of Texas, they're going to go into the final weekend with some work to do as well. Should be fun to see this weekend though, because right now Florida, like Texas, is not thrilled to see Florida come into town. Like, guarantee that with the way they're playing. All right, let's get to some preview stuff here. We've talked a lot about some of the series, but we'll tack some things on and talk about some we haven't talked about, and then chat it here and get on with your Friday. Arkansas LSU is obviously the biggest series on the docket this weekend. Alec Box Stadium is going to be rocking, always is, but this series in particular, if the rain holds, obviously the rain is a variable there. Got a preview of that series on the site, so if you haven't read it, go check that out. It's my SEC series of the week. Zach Root and Kate Anderson, going to be a fantastic matchup in game 1 of the series. And for that matter, Gage Wood and Anthony Ianson, a great matchup too. Gage Wood, not fully stretched out yet, so he's probably not going to be able to match Ianson pitch for pitch in terms of getting deep in the game. But when he's in there, I think in terms of quality, he's got a chance to match Ianson. Last 2 starts combined, 7 innings, shutout baseball for Gage Wood. He's been awesome. So 2 really good matchups there for those 2 teams. I will be watching to see how LSU handles left-handed pitching. That was something that became a really hot topic at the end of last weekend when A&M had 3 lefty starters against LSU, and LSU struggled so mightily offensively in College Station. They're going to face Root for sure. And, he's a tough, even if you are a team that hits lefties well, Zach Root's just going to be a tough customer. But there's a pretty good chance also Arkansas starts a lefty in game 3 and Landon Beidelshees, who's more gettable, just in general, but is still a tough lefty. Good stuff, has some pedigree, all that stuff. So they're going to have to hit some lefties this weekend probably. Now, the good news is Arkansas is not a lefty-heavy bullpen. So if you can get the starters out of the way, should be able to do some things against the bullpen. Then again, Arkansas's bullpen is super talented, so that's not a sure thing either. So should be a lot of fun. Looking forward to that series. Vanderbilt and Tennessee. My big thing here is Tennessee's not going to lose 4 home series this season, are they? ? It just seems it seems implausible that they would lose 3, and they already have. So to lose 4, just can't even imagine it. And this is a series I probably didn't think much of 4 or 6 weeks ago, right? Tennessee was number 1 in the country at one point. It seemed like they were just kind of off like a rocket ship again. Vanderbilt was what they were, which is okay. They're pretty good, but are they really in that upper crust of the SEC? And they still might not be, but they're a heck of a lot closer than I thought they'd be. The pitching is rounded into form. I like the way some of the guys in the lineup are swinging the bats. Braden Holcomb has been awesome in SEC play, much better than just his overall stats would suggest. So some good signs there for Vanderbilt. So I think this series is kind of sneaky interesting in a way I didn't anticipate it being. Vanderbilt also is kind of in a similar place to Auburn, where they're sitting at 14-10, a couple more wins, and they feel good about hosting. But the RPI is in a good spot, top 5 RPI. So if you're able to really get a result, if you're able to get a result this weekend and then go into a final weekend with Kentucky at home, suddenly a top 8 looks within range for Vanderbilt if they can keep the train on the tracks these next couple of weekends. Obviously, a road series against Tennessee is not a place you would normally look and say, oh, they could get a result there. This year's been a little bit different because Lindsey Nelson has just not been as tough a place to win this season. The Egg Bowl, Ole Miss and Mississippi State. I mentioned it earlier. My thing is, from an Ole Miss standpoint, you could still host. You probably got to win this series this weekend, which will be tough in Starkville, but it's still on the table. And then for State, if I were State, I would really want to not have to bank on sweeping Mizzou, especially because Mizzou played okay last weekend against Georgia. So, if they're rounding into form, whatever that form looks like, maybe they'll be a tough customer last weekend. We'll see. But regardless, if I'm State, I'm looking to get something done before that. Speaking of Georgia and Bama, if relatedly to what I just said, if Georgia plays like it did last weekend against Mizzou, it will lose this series. Mizzou was in every one of those games, and yes, Georgia did pull away late, and they deserve credit for that. But Missouri was more competitive in that series than it's been in any this season in the SEC. Is some of that Missouri played well? Absolutely. But we also know Georgia's just not as good on the road, especially offensively. Some of the home road splits for individual hitters are pretty, are pretty stark. And so this one's in Tuscaloosa. Alabama's got some pitchers that are rounding into form. I was a little bit skeptical last few weeks of just are Riley Quick and Zane Adams, good enough in the front of that rotation, or is the two primary pieces in that rotation? And they've both been trending in the right direction. So I need to give them probably a little bit more credit for what they've done and how they've rounded into form as the season has gone on. And if they're on their game, those two guys can beat just about anybody in the conference. So Georgia's going to have to play better than it did last weekend. And specifically, it's going to have to find some offense better than what it had last weekend. Pitching wise, they were great against Mizzou, but it is Mizzou's offense. I get that, but that part of the equation was not an issue last weekend the way offense was. Florida and Texas. I've got a podcast out on Florida right now. Go listen to it if you have not. It's with Nick Marcinko, who covers the team for GatorsCountry.com. So we talked to him. Talked about a bunch of stuff, talked for about 30 minutes about the Gators, a lot of interesting stuff there about how they got where they are. Check that out if you haven't. One of the things we did talk about that is definitely true is that the Liam Peterson start for Florida every weekend is just so crucial, because after him, it's a lot more uncertain. Freshman Aiden King has had his moments. The third starter spot, is maybe Pierce Capola again, but he's not going to be in a position to give you 5, 6, 7 innings. He's going to be a kind of an opener. And so in the bullpen, they're still looking for a lot of stuff. They still haven't really figured out the bullpen except for Jake Clemente. And you'd rather not have to use him on a day in which Liam Peterson started. So Liam Peterson starts have taken on a lot of importance for Florida. So that's obviously going to be a key. Texas, of course, looking to get back on track. They didn't really lose much after last weekend. Maybe some pride because you never want to get swept, but still number one because of the chaos around them. All of the big picture stuff is still in front of them. They're the number one RPI team as we sit here this morning. They flipped with Georgia again. The metrics are great. Like they're going to be a top 8. Like, but you do want to actually play well. Like, yes, they've got all that stuff in front of them, but you want to go into the postseason feeling good about the way you're playing. So this is an opportunity for Texas to do that. Oklahoma, Kentucky. We talked a little bit about this series earlier. Feels like a must win for the Wildcats, but they will have the opportunity to do that. Again, Oklahoma is a good team, but not an unbeatable one. So Kentucky does have a good shot here, but it's important. You got to get it done. From Oklahoma standpoint, 22 RPI, not really in host range yet, but if they can flip this series and win a road series, take their conference record to 15-12, that would put them in a position where they could earn a host spot last weekend of the regular season. And now you need the RPI to move too. It's not just conference record. You'd need that RPI to be probably at least inside the top 18 and really in the top 16 to start to feel a little more confident about being able to do that. But it is on the table for Oklahoma, especially if it can win the road series this weekend. And then finally, Missouri and A&M. I mentioned Missouri playing a little bit better last weekend against Georgia. that's if nothing else, I'm happy to see them playing better and being a little more competitive in their conference games. We'll see if that carries over. Of course, this is a road series in College Station. Aggies could more or less secure a postseason spot if they're able to sweep Missouri this weekend, as Missouri's previous 8 opponents have been able to. They would be in really good shape if they were able to do that, to get to the 13 wins now, and not put a little bit of extra undue pressure on their series with Georgia on the road in Athens to end the regular season, because we know that Georgia in Athens is a whole different deal than Georgia on the road. So, or Georgia being on the road. So you'd really like, if you're A&M, to not, again, the point being, you don't want to have to put a ton of pressure on that final weekend. So if you take care of business with Mizzou and sweep them, you really probably feel like you don't have to do much of anything in Athens. And if you get a win, that's gravy. But if Mizzou's able to steal a game from you, you do go into the final weekend, A&M does, like feeling like, hey, we got to do something here. And that puts a lot of pressure on. So we'll see how that plays out. All right, we got some few comments waiting here, and then we will get you guys moving here on a Friday. LSU was 7 for 33 last weekend. This has to change this weekend. I assume you're meaning against lefties, Carl. Is that what that is? But yeah, offense in general. Hunt Palmer says weather in Baton Rouge right now is not great, Joe. Shocker, I know. Yeah. Thoughts and prayers, I guess, is what I will say about it. I mean, for me too, frankly, I don't want to have to stay up until 2 a.m. to finish watching LSU Arkansas, because I'm going to watch it anyway. So I'd rather it be at a reasonable time. Jeremy Scott says Roll Tide, whether they host a regional or not, they're good enough to beat anybody. I would generally agree with that. And go back to the RPI page here in the background. Alabama sits at 12 in the RPI. Yeah. I didn't mention that with them, but I should have. I mean, yeah, this could be a repeat of 2013 where both Auburn and Alabama host. 13 and 11. You take this series at home against Georgia, you're sitting at 13 wins or 15 wins. And then you'd feel like you have to maybe do something the final weekend. That's at Florida, which right now isn't great, but certainly not impossible for Alabama. So yeah, they're in the mix. You just gotta keep winning. Probably feel like you have to win. You're gonna need at least 3 wins to be in the conversation. If you win both series, you're feeling a lot better. Yeah, we'll see. Carl Dunn says he's responding to Hunt, but he says, wish they could have started this one yesterday. You can start series early. You can get you have to kind of work it out with the conference. You can do that, but the other thing to think about is if it looks like it's just going to be, and I don't know, I haven't looked at the Baton Rouge forecast like you guys have, but if you start a series, you have to finish that series in 3 days. So you can't start it on Thursday and then give yourself until Sunday to finish it. So you can't be like, all right, we'll just play Thursday, we'll take Friday off, then we'll play Saturday, Sunday, and be done with it. You have to finish the series in 3 days. So you had to finish by Saturday if you start on Thursday. And, if you start on Friday, you can't roll it over to Monday if you start on Friday. So that's in place. So if you've got one of these weekends where the weather it's just going to be a crapshoot, you might as well wait until Friday and just see what you get. But I kind of wish that would change. It feels like the kind of thing, especially in the SEC, where the travel is not as tricky as in other leagues, because there is the money to do more flying and to do more charters and all that kind of stuff. I'm not saying it's easy, but it does feel like that's something that maybe should be talked about a little bit more, is giving some flexibility there in the series. Patrick Yankee asks, where will you be this weekend, Joe? I am command centering it. I will be at home this weekend. It'll be my second weekend in a row at home, which has not been the case since weeks 3 and 4 of the regular season. Maybe not even then. I feel like maybe the third weekend I went to a game, but it might have been local, so that doesn't really count. But yeah, so I'm looking forward to it. Last weekend was great being at home, because I felt like every inning of every game, which is obviously not true, but it kind of felt like I had a good feel for it. So I'll do that again this weekend. I've also I'm working an ESPN Plus game tonight at East Carolina. So, but that's early enough. I should still be able to at least listen to some games on the drive home. But Saturday and Sunday are wide open for me to really be locked in. So I'm looking forward to it. Last thing, Ryan asks, do you think former South Carolina coach Mark Kingston will be successful at Creighton? Service ran a very good and consistent program. I agree. I will say this, though. Like, Creighton is very consistent. They're very rarely bad. They're typically solid at least, and they've been regional quality a handful of times. But just because they're regional quality doesn't mean they've been regional teams. It feels like they've had a lot of near misses, right, with teams that were pretty good but just couldn't close the deal. And so I think that's the key for Kingston, is to kind of take it to the next level where Creighton is more consistently a postseason team. And look, that's tough with UConn in that league because they're always going to be kind of the favorite. And the Big East is rarely good enough to be a two-bid league because the bottom of that conference is not very good. So that's the next step and I think they can get there. Like, Creighton has a lot going for it, so because there's a lot, at a bare minimum, there's a lot of players in Omaha. Dalton Bargo from Omaha, from Tennessee, former Missouri player and current Tennessee player. Dalton Bargo, he's from Omaha. And unless those guys want to go to Nebraska, and some of them do, a lot of them do, but Creighton's a great choice. If you're a local player who wants to stay home, you're going to get to play in Charles Schwab Field, which means your atmospheres aren't going to be great, but the playing surface is going to be good. The quality of the facility is good. So, a lot going for Creighton. So to answer your question, I do think he's going to be successful. He was successful at places that were, frankly, I think, tougher jobs. South Florida back then, when he had the job, I think was tougher than what Creighton is right now. People assume because that job's in Florida that it's easy. It's not. It's in better shape now, but when he took that job over, it was not in great shape. And then he won at Illinois State, which is another program that was not in great shape when he took over. So I think he'll do well. Now, what that means, we'll see. I don't think Creighton's going to become a College World Series contender type team, but if you told me they're a lot more consistently in the postseason, I'd believe it. And he's a good coach. Just didn't finish the way anybody wanted at South Carolina, and that's okay. That happens. Things just get stale. But I do think he's a good coach that could win there at Creighton as well. All right. Good questions, everybody. Good to hear from you guys on a Friday. I'll be back tomorrow morning with a recap of Friday's action around the SEC, and we'll peek ahead to Saturday's games. Enjoy the baseball, everyone. If you're in the line of bad weather, I hope it clears out in time for games, and I will talk to you all tomorrow morning. Take care.